Amazing Women Speak podcast, inspiring and motivating every Black woman to own, honor, and execute her amazing, individually and collectively, as it was established at birth.
Good evening and happy Sunday. I am Crystal L. Gunn, and welcome to another episode of Amazing Women Speak. So while you are getting settled in for the show, hit the share button. Share Amazing Women Speak so your friends and followers can get in on this conversation. We live in a world filled with trauma, and the impact it has on our lives can be heavy. But how do you break free from the chains, find healing, and make authentic connections? We're going to find out this evening. Michele, thank you so much for saying yes to Amazing Women Speak. Thank you for curating these conversations. Thank you for sharing your amazing with the world. And thank you for being here in spite of the weather.
Good evening. It is a pleasure always to be in community with you, having these conversations where we get a chance to unpack so much of the things that we carry as Black women specifically. And each week we get to grow, we get to learn from one another. What does it mean to own our amazing and to come on the other side of whatever the topic is that we're talking about? And tonight is extremely special for those of us who have recognized the amount of trauma that we hold and the amount of trauma that we don't recognize that our body is holding. We can't have this conversation without having an amazing guest who has dedicated her life and her work to really helping us understand trauma and unpacking it and being able to get to the other side. So as I say every week, we are short on time, long on conversation. This is the shortest hour of your day. So we need to dive into this conversation quickly, and we cannot do that without inviting in our amazing guest. Good evening. Please introduce yourself to the folks and we can get this conversation started.
Absolutely. I am wonderful. Glad to be here. My name is LaQuita Fergerson. I am a trauma and divorce recovery coach. I know when you hear trauma and divorce together, some may or may not realize that they are, in fact, one and the same. So my passion and my mission, like you said, is I've dedicated my life to educating the public, supporting especially women, Black women, as we are the shock absorbers of society when it comes to trauma, how it impacts our body, but also how to validate that trauma, how to honor it, how to release it from our bodies so that we can heal and thrive.
Incredible. Thank you. Look forward to learning more about you, more about your work. Whatever platform you're joining us from tonight, we invite you to be a part of this conversation. Drop your questions, your comments in the chat. We'd love to include those as we go along, and tonight will be no different. So when I think about trauma, right, like it has become a conversation that we are having now more than ever. Why is it, do you think, that we have lifted up trauma, specifically named it, and are utilizing it in the way that we are utilizing it now?
You know, I would like to say that it was the pandemic, but I think even before then, the awareness around mental health, the disruption in our bodies and feeling ungrounded and unsettled, we didn't have a name for it. Things that we were expected to endure, neighborhoods that we live in, it just came with the territory. And so without identifying what trauma actually is, we didn't know that we could validate our experiences. And so trauma, many definitions that, come to mind, but one of my favorite is that trauma is a sudden change to the meaning, the safety, and the predictability of your world. It's something that happens suddenly, and it could even be a good thing. Childbirth is beautiful, but it's traumatic. It suddenly changes the meaning, the safety, and the predictability of your world. And so learning to navigate, to understand how our brains respond to it, what our body does to it, how it holds on to our emotions, and how to recognize it. We've had more conversations like these to understand and raise awareness about trauma.
And so oftentimes when we think about trauma, and I love that definition. Let me back up and say
Mhm.
that I really love that definition and hope to remember to ask you several times through the night to repeat it because it
Mhm.
really does ground us, right? Like it really does help us wrap our experiences, being able to put a definition and understand what's happening to us and in us. So thank you for sharing that. When I think about trauma and the ways that it has impacted lives, it's really difficult to name the thing,
Mhm.
right? And so we don't know what to call it. We don't know to call it trauma because we don't know what that thing is, what the trigger is. So, in the work that you do, how do you begin to help us unpack how to name that thing?
Yeah, that's a very good question because what trauma does to us is it detaches us from our bodies. It detaches us from the part of our brain that can think cognitively. And so to come up with the words to identify the stressor or the stimulus is difficult when you're in a traumatic situation. So one of the first things that I like to do with my clients is to get into grounding exercises where you are physically touching a part of your body where the pain is. You may not be able to identify the word, but you can feel where it is. And so often when you can feel where it is, it might be in your throat, it might be the back of your head, it might be your
Mm,
chest, your stomach, it might be your thighs, wherever it might be. Based on where you indicate it is, there are emotional charts that go along with each of those. When we get anxious, our stomach, we get knots in our stomach. If we've felt like we've lost our voice, sometimes our throat tightens up. So there are indicators based on where you are physically feeling the pain that can begin to trace that stimulus and when and why it may have happened.
wow. Wow. Right? Like just naming the
Yeah.
body parts, right? Like in the
Right.
way that we hold that is powerful in and of itself. And so like I feel this call to start more narrow when I usually like to
Mhm.
start conversations at a really high level. I want to talk about trauma in the Black woman,
Mm.
right? Because we get to name our things. We're last on the list, right? Forgetting to name it and being able to acknowledge that that's the thing that is keeping us from being able to move through, right? We're expected to carry it. And so I wanted to spend some time talking specifically about trauma and the Black woman and how do we normalize being able to talk about it and being able to name it so that we can have some strategies to begin to be able to move through it and recognize that we have permission to put it down.
Mhm. That part, the permission to put it down. And I think it begins with the permission to call a thing, as Ian Levine loves to say, and I love to imitate. We have to learn, to give ourselves permission to call a thing. What is normal when we especially begin to start to, pay attention to our bodies respond, we so quickly say yes when we want to say no. We so quickly are there to rescue someone else when we aren't even able to stabilize
Rescue.
and care for ourselves. And so it is a matter of going through the uncomfortable first. Because when you begin to speak up about things that you didn't normally speak about, you're going to possibly receive pushback. You'll have, you get the
Right,
labels of the angry Black woman, and here
right,
we go again, and or here we go talking about slavery again. Yeah, we are because epigenetics. I don't know if you want to get that deep, but we are carrying in ourselves the trauma of our ancestors.
right.
And so, until we decide to be the generation to actually go down and pluck it up from the root, it will continue to grow. And so it is a measure of bravery and courage to use our voice in a way to create change.
So, right, like oftentimes to not do that, right? Like to not be able to carry it, it's a sign of weakness, right? To
Mhm.
just tough it up, right? To just get through it. Those are the things that generationally we've been told, right? And it's been because we have to be this or we are required to do this. And so to not be able to get through it, whatever the it is, we have historically been told that it is a sign of weakness. So how do we begin to give ourselves permission to say, yeah, no, that's not okay, right? Like that again, not being able to call it trauma, but that thing that I endured was not okay. And I shouldn't have to just suck it up. I shouldn't have to just, right, like get through it. It's not okay. And how do we begin to find our voices around it not being okay?
Yeah. It's a measure of compassion that we give ourselves, but we also learn to give it to others. I'll use myself as an example. It wasn't until I started to look at my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmother through a compassionate lens that I realized they were tired of carrying it way before I was here,
Mm, right,
and they
right.
they very likely wanted to set it down. And so giving myself that permission to say, you know what? I'm gonna choose to set it down. It's gonna be uncomfortable. It's not gonna look like anything I'm used to looking at. I'm gonna feel soft, and even in that
Right.
softness, it's gonna feel strange and vulnerable. And I think even in the last 5 years, there's been a new, the soft girl era. And that I love that. Creating days where today is me day. I'm doing absolutely nothing, or I'm only doing the things that I want to do, or today I'm cropping out a period of time where I don't answer my phone because I don't want to. I had a girlfriend just call me last night and said, I need 5 minutes of mommy time. I just need 5 minutes. And something as simple as that, like, can you just come over and let me walk out of the house for 5 minutes and watch my kids? Relying on our communities more, and giving them an opportunity to show up for us.
Right. Like, and how brave, because there was a time where we would not have asked.
Mm-mm.
Mhm.
We would not have asked. It's a sign of, like, what do you mean you need 5 minutes away from your children?
Right,
Mhm.
right. How dare you?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about being detached from our bodies, and I always
Mhm.
say we've been conditioned since birth to be detached from our bodies. But how does the person, they're not in therapy, they're not there yet, but how do you start to reattach,
Mhm.
right, to your body so that you can feel, be present, and then start that journey of healing?
Mhm. I refer to it as soul work, and there's so much outside of therapy, so many tools and resources that we have. There are journals, there are podcasts dedicated to it, there are mindful meditations dedicated to it. Um, and it really comes down to sitting with yourself. And that's going to be uncomfortable at first because you're
Right.
going to start to feel things that you didn't feel before. And that in itself is going to be a little alarming. But giving yourself the opportunity to breathe through it, learning how to do deep breathing exercises, which breathing exercises calm you down. I often hear people inhaling a lot, but it's really the exhale. The longer the exhale is where it calms you down. It triggers a different part of your brain to let you know that you're safe. And so there's so much education depending on your, learning style, whether you like to read or listen or watch a movie, that you can start to learn these different grounding exercises, so that you can begin to feel again and give yourself permission to not be okay with it at first.
Right. So very, very true. You talked about, right, like that period where you looked at your mother, your grandmother, your great grandmother, and through the lens of compassion, got to see a different story, right?
Mhm.
And I really appreciate you lifting that up, because that's the work of breaking generational curses, and not about shame or blame, right? There was some survival that was happening in
Yeah.
my grandmother. And had she had tools and resources to think about it different, it might have been different. And
Mhm.
here I am, right?
Yeah.
And so now I can make a conscious decision to break that generational curse and to name it and find the resources. This is where I really believe that social media has done some good, right?
Mhm.
Like opening up the conversation and start naming those things that we did not have and being able to label them as trauma inducing, right? Trauma producing, And what are we going to do about it? And so, like you said, there are podcasts. There are so many resources now that my mother, my grandmother didn't have access to, that I do now. And so, how do you begin to weed out the noise to find the thing that might work for you to begin yourself on a healing journey?
That's a very good question because it can be through trial and error. There is a thing as information overload. And sometimes with trauma, we can begin to embody someone else's trauma by listening to their story and take on their anger. Part of releasing trauma is allowing yourself to be angry. And when we do that and when we hear someone else's story, then we could begin to internalize that. And so my favorite method is to journal. Someone else's might be to jog, someone else's might be to watch a movie or whatever the case may be. But adapting it to our needs. And I just want to touch on what you said about social media because I've seen a pattern happening. It is a wonderful thing of all the new resources and information that we have, but often what happens is we begin to victimize ourselves over things that we never had observed before.
Mm,
And in that, it can create more distance between those relationships that we are actually working to heal. And so it is a measure of caution there to give the grace to the person or people or communities or wherever you feel that you were unjustly treated. The same way that we do with social causes, political causes, we realize that the individuals that live through civil uprisings, they did the best they could with the resources that they have. And
right.
because of the sacrifices that they made, we're able to do better. And so it's the same that goes with our ancestors and other communities that we may be a part of, learning to separate our experience from their lack of resources.
So I'm going to ask you to unpack victimization a little bit,
Mhm.
right? Like to all in the middle of having conversation, we're like doing some educating, and not assuming that everybody has a full grasp of.
Mhm.
So when you talk about victimization, say a little bit more about that.
Sure. So there is a phenomenon, it's called false memory, where we could hear someone else's story and we began to internalize it and think it happened to us too. Or we take the details of theirs that's closely related to ours and we start to wonder, is that what happened to me?
Mm,
And that's where the victimization comes in
mm,
because we create more trauma because of the overanalyzing and overthinking. And so it's a caution to not be trapped in someone else's experience, but to have the open dialogue, if you're able, with the people that are still, that you're able to have the conversations with the licensed professional to help you unpack that so that you are not internalizing and adding more trauma into the cellular to your body cells.
wow.
So, I need to slide in here with just get on the financial side because I do
Yes.
financial coaching. And I
Hmm.
always say, we don't know why we operate the way that we operate, but it's these things that we inherited and then all of the trauma and everything else that we've experienced during life. And one of the things that I always say is when you redefine and heal your financial relationship, it helps to heal all of these other areas of your life because the same things that's negatively impacting your finances shows up in all of these other areas
Hmm.
in their life. And so it I don't know, it just always amazes me that this trauma that we have, like how it just wreaks havoc in our lives in
Absolutely.
every area, right? And you may think, okay, well, it's just these relationships that I have with other people, but you don't even necessarily think that it's impacting how you treat yourself, what you put into your body, who you hang around with, and all of those things. How do you just start to figure out? So, if I come to see you, right,
Hmm.
how do we even start to figure out where do we begin?
Hmm.
Yeah, where do we
It a-
begin?
it all starts with our childhood. Our nucleus, however we were cared for. There are patterns, like you mentioned, of the way that we begin to think about finances, emotional support, the way that we thought about food. Was food a social, a social activity that we did together? Or was it for nurturing? So when we began to, like, I do assessments and we get pretty deep into your patterns, and I actually do a money, your money mindset, because that even shows up. I mean, everything that we do has a strategy to it.
Mhm.
We just don't sit down to really look at it. If I smell chocolate chip cookies, it's really difficult for me to resist. It could be something hazardous going on, but if I smell a chocolate chip cookie, it's like, oh wait, is that dangerous? Because I smell a cookie, and it all goes back to when I was 7 years old. That was one of the first things I learned to bake with my mom was chocolate chip cookies.
Mm.
It creates nostalgia for me.
Right.
So, sitting down with our strategies, whether it's a coach or a therapist, someone that can help you assess your patterns, because like you mentioned, they show up in every aspect of our life. If you have a tendency to rescue people in your church, you're going to do it everywhere. you know
Right.
if you
Right.
feel like your identity and your worth is based on how well you work, then in your friendships you feel like they need you.
Correct.
It
Right.
shows up everywhere. And so tying the making the connections and being willing to, like you said, it's not to blame yourself, but to know yourself more so that you can do better.
Michelle, how does it show up? Like you have to see it when you're working with clients on the fitness
Oh,
side.
absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Because we hold it physically in our bodies and we don't even recognize it. And somebody's ability or inability to just reach higher
Mhm.
is impacted from what they're holding physically in their
Mm.
bodies. And so, right, like much like you do in financial coaching, there are other elements, right? And so
Mhm.
there is a mindset conversation I'm going to have. I just did an intake today, and there's a mind conversation even before we pick up a weight,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the two are so intertwined. And so what we carry prevents us from being able to carry what we want. And
Mm.
so it absolutely does become a part of that conversation, even in the physical, right? And so we can't, if we pay attention, none of these sit in separate boxes. And we
Mm.
try to separate them out and fix this one thing and wonder why the other three boxes are still in chaos, right? Like, no, they're all intertwined and we need to be able to address them. Um, so yeah, I like language and what gets tossed out there and what we utilize or misutilize because we hear a phrase and we grab onto it without fully understanding what it is. So I want to talk about the phrase of trauma bonding.
Oh. This one is I've heard so many applications of it. Some people think that trauma bonding is when you bond with someone over your trauma. I mean, I went through a divorce, you went through a divorce, we're friends.
Correct.
And that's not necessarily what trauma bonding is. Trauma bonding is the imbalance of power. It's a power struggle. And so it's a combination of abuse followed by this period of love, or love bombing, where they're just all in your face and they're just showering you with gifts and commendation and everything. And then suddenly they ghost you. But then they come back and they're gaslighting you like, no, I wasn't gone. I was, and so it's, it creates really like, if I don't know if you all, well, you guys look old enough to know the yo-yo game. It's a emotional yo-yo, or a mental yo-yo where you're back and forth and back and forth. But what creates the bond is that it feeds on some part of you that needs healing. So
Mm.
it could be that you have low self-esteem. It could mean that you had a insecure attachment with a caregiver or a parent as a child that was never healed. It could be that you don't really know who you are and you need somebody else to help you define it. It could be that you have previous trauma that was never healed, and the presence of this person allows you not to focus on it. It could be the financial difficulty that you've experienced that they're here to rescue you. I don't struggle when they're around. So there is something positive about it, just enough to make you stay, to keep you forgiving, to keep you in the cycle.
Wow, right? Because most of us are out here operating on what we believe trauma bonding to be. And that is, right, like me drawing to someone else who has experienced a similar
Mhm.
situation, right? Like that did not have a positive outcome. That's what we're out here operating
Yeah.
under, right? And that's why I
Yeah.
said there's, as powerful as language is, there's a danger of grabbing hold of something and not having a full understanding of what it means. And that's how we can often weaponize and misuse terms that are keeping us further from what we need to be working towards. I really
Yeah.
appreciate
Yeah.
you lifting that up.
Mhm. Now, a trauma bond relationship can become codependent, like those friendships can be if they, you bonded over one. I had a friend that when I went through a divorce who, as soon as I started dating again, she was upset and we were no longer friends. So that was quite codependent, but there wasn't an imbalance of power there. That was more of a codependent relationship. The trauma bond comes in the narcissistic relationships that you see, where there's some level of abuse. It could be between a coworker. It could be between, if you were kidnapped and you form a bond with someone who harmed you. Those are the trauma bonds where trauma is happening, but you're still bonded to this person. It's
And there's a
creating
power element.
even they have that power to keep you coming back to them.
So how do you, if you're in that, how do you recognize it? Like, because you just may think, oh, this person is around, so I'm not feeling the bad things or whatever. They don't necessarily ghost you, but so how do you recognize that that's what's going on?
I'll tell you one of my, because I was in a trauma bond marriage the first time. And when I started to realize like something was off here, is that I was daydreaming a lot about a relationship that did not exist. Meaning I would sit in my driveway and just envision this life that we didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that, oh, this is something we're working towards. It's what I thought we would have had. It's what he sold me, but that's not what we had. And so taking a step away from your reality versus what you expected to see what you are actually experiencing. A lot of times our friends and families are the first ones to see it, but you know how that goes. As soon as they mention it to you, you dig
Right.
in deeper. You dig in deeper. If you have, a therapist or someone licensed professional that can begin to help you piece these things together. But if you begin to notice that you are a different person in their presence and away from them, or
Mhm.
that you long to be away from them to experience something better, then those are indicators that you are in a trauma bond.
Wow. Knowledge is power. Thank you so much for sharing that. So Monet is in the chat and is asking, like, if you could speak a little bit more on codependency and how
Mhm.
you can recognize it to break it or address it. Great
Yes,
question, Monet.
absolutely. So codependency is where you almost like Velcro. One of you can't do something without the other. Or if you do, then the other person guilts you into, why would you do that without me? Or you were supposed to wait for me to do that. Or you couldn't possibly do that without me. And we see that it could happen parent child, it can happen between close friends, it could happen, in any situation where we are constantly in relation to with someone. But with the codependent relationship, you almost feel like your progress or your movement has to be right in line with the other person. That as soon as you start to go a little bit more than the other person, then it's that, that what is it called, the crab effect, where the
Yeah.
crab in a barrel effect, where they want to keep you with them. Like, what are you doing? Where are you going? May begin to just shoot down all of your dreams, because they don't like your progress. And if you are in any type of business owner space, entrepreneurial space, you might see this more often than not. um, so to watch your circles. But yeah, that codependent relationship, once again, check your boundaries. If you are not able to set them without experiencing some type of negative consequence, then you're likely in a codependent relationship.
Right. Like, so how do we begin to break that? Right. Like, so if we begin to recognize that there is this codependency, that there's this imbalance, and I can't move if you can't move, those kind of things. And so you recognize this is not the tribe, this is not the person, this is not, how do you break away from that?
Yeah.
Because we hold a
So,
lot of guilt, right? Like
mhm,
we hold a ton of guilt. So we stay longer than we should because
yeah,
of that, worried
yeah.
about somebody else's feelings.
And then our ego is attached to it sometimes. We want to feel needed. We want to,
Ah.
feel valued by the fact that somebody else wants us around. What I love is to recommend books, and one of my favorite books when it comes to this type of situation is called The Dance of Anger. Um, I forgot her last name, but it's Harriet something. But she relates it to literally being on the dance floor. And you're in this dysfunctional dance where everybody is watching you. They know you're both uncomfortable or everybody's uncomfortable, but this is what you guys do. So you just keep in the dance until one of you decides to either slowly break away or abruptly walk off the dance floor. It's
Mm.
up to you. It's up to you to decide. Some way may feel better, slowly breaking away. So maybe you'll begin to make, conversation with them and say, hey, I notice like every time you call me, it's only because when you need something. Like, can you call me just to say hello? See how that goes. Or the next time you may say, like, hey, I went out to X, Y, and Z, and they say, well, why didn't you invite me? Oh, I just wanted to broaden my, see how that responds. Or you could just abruptly say, I'm not accepting this anymore and see how that goes. You know, it depends on you and how well you care about the relationship lasting. But if you think of it as a dance that you no longer want to participate in, your movement will dictate whether the other person moves with you or they stay behind.
Those, I love those. Those are really concrete examples, ways of testing where that level of dependency is, and what strategy do I need to make next or take next
Mhm.
based on that response. I really love those concrete examples. Thank you. Um,
Somebody's saying, but he wants to be around me because he loves me.
Mm.
Somebody's saying that.
And then I asked the question, what is your definition of love?
Mhm.
Who was the first person that defined love for you?
right.
Because that is how you will recognize it. And sometimes it's the way we think about love, the way we recognize love. Our first encounter with love may have been a trauma bond. It may have been a parent or a caregiver who disciplined us one minute and then said, okay, come on, where you want to go? And they, treated you with something. And so that's how you may recognize love.
Mhm.
But love is a mutually respected relationship. You should be allowed to be yourself, to be vulnerable, to not be perfect all the time, to need your space, to have your own identity. And so you may feel that this person is loving you, and they may be loving you to the best of their ability and what they know how to love. But when you ask yourself, is this the love that I deserve? Is this the love that I want to carry me throughout the rest of my life? Then that is your opportunity to reevaluate your definition of love, because you are only going to accept what you allow, and you will only allow what you think is normal.
Yeah. All right. Like, so it just really makes me think of the importance of doing that self work, regardless, right? Like, even if you have not identified a thing as trauma yet, but until you do that work, do you even know what it is, right? Like, that explanation around how did you define love? What's your first experience? If I don't think about that, if I don't do that part of the work, I may leave that particular relationship, but there's a strong likelihood I'm going to replace it with
Yeah,
something similar for
yeah.
that very reason. So
Mhm.
that I work, even again, if I'm not trying to solve a trauma in this moment, right? Like some active thing, so much is buried in us that that independent work that we have to do, right? Like one of our podcasts a while ago, right? Like it's about the maintenance
Hmm.
of ourselves. None of us can drive anything for thousands and thousands of miles and think that the engine's going to perform like we need it to. That right, like all of those things, even if there's no indicator light on in that moment, at some point I have to have it serviced.
Yeah.
Right? None of us are so healthy that we wouldn't benefit from having a conversation with someone who's outside of, I know her well,
Mhm.
to be able to help. So, what's the frequency of something like that? Would you recommend just that place where I can be soft with someone who isn't going to feed that the wrong way?
When you ask that, you mean the frequency of the maintenance or when to check in?
Correct, right? Like, I'm not, life is going good.
Mhm. And I would even say, I love the illustration of the car. And I didn't like this, analogy somebody just gave me recently because she's like, you're pushing 45, so you're kind of becoming an older car, and which means maintenance is going to look a little different. You've had more life experience. You're lower on
Great point.
your energy level and things
Great
like
point.
that. So when you're younger, you might go longer without checking in, because everything's working for
Great
you.
point.
But the older you get, the more experiences that you've had, the more things that have suddenly happened in your life. Because remember, trauma is the sudden change of the meaning of and your meaning, the predictability and safety of your life. So the pandemic was one. A loss of a job might be another one. A loss of a loved one might be another one. Moving to another state might be another one. It could be something positive that shifts the way shifts your outlook on life. And so then you go back and you look at like, okay, how is my identity shifting? And even that, like giving yourself permission to be a different person based on what you've experienced. One of the things that I talk about is trauma integrated identity, because so often when we experience things, we judge ourselves based on what I can't believe I experienced. I can't believe I went through that. Out of
Right.
all the things I could have went through, I can't believe I went through that. Now who am I now? And that the more we judge ourselves, the more suppressed we come in, even showing up in our authentic selves. So that's part of it too, is allowing ourselves to integrate the changes in our lives.
So, the work that you do, trauma and divorce recovery,
Mhm.
right? Divorce for some is a sense of freedom, a
Mhm.
sense of new beginnings. Talk to us about recovery.
Yeah. So recovery it's not going to look the same for every person. Like you said, some people are like, I am free. Praise the Lord. you know, and for others,
But
it
even in that, right? Like,
resurfaces
isn't there something to recover from? Right? Like,
what, right. In those cases, what it would be is to take the lessons that you learned,
hmm,
you know, those lessons is recovery. You may have people who have bypass surgery or cosmetic surgery where it resulted in something beautiful. It's what you desired. There was still a healing process that had to go on though.
right.
And so when you speak about recovery, it could be like allowing yourself to create a new identity. That's exciting, but maybe your social circle is going to change now. Where do you want to see yourself? What communities do you want to be a part of? So it can be exciting in your recovery, or it can be something that you need to heal some wounds that resurfaced, some scabs that came open again. So I'm glad you asked that question too, because when people see divorce recovery, they may think like, oh no, I'm good. There's nothing I need to recover from.
Correct.
Right, I'm divorced,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
I'm divorced. I'm free. Um, it could be taking those beautiful lessons that you learn and creating a phenomenal next chapter for you.
Yeah, I appreciate, right, like, and that's the road I was hoping that you would go down, because there's still something to recover from. Something as simple as your social circle
Mhm.
changing. You don't think about that, or you may not have thought about that. So there's still some work to do, even when you believe that the divorce was a good thing, right? Like, I'm free. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate you lifting that up. Um, I I had a friend who recently got divorced, and people went at her pretty hard because they wanted her to do what her forefathers had done, what her mother had done and her grandmother had did. And for her, this was breaking a generational curse, not staying in a marriage for the sake of, right? And so for her, she was doing the thing, and she got a lot of blowback because of that, because her mother and her grandmother stayed in relationships that were not functional or producing the life that, right, like, she's watching that she felt like that they deserved, that they acknowledged that they deserved, and they stayed in it. So let's talk a little bit about the divorce to recovery process for
Hmm.
folks. And so maybe I'm contemplating divorce. Is there a conversation that I can have with you that can help me unpack and figure out what some of those steps should be?
Absolutely. So when I work with individuals, it is from thinking about divorce to I've filed the papers and we're in the middle of a divorce process, all the way to, okay, it's over and well, now what do I do? So anywhere in those stages of divorce is where I would meet with you. And depending on, if you are contemplating divorce, that's when we can look at your love languages, your love cycles, what your expectations were when you began the relationship. Was this the first or the second marriage for either of you? Because those, they come with different parameters and baggage, if you will. And so we look at your identity in your marriage. Do you feel like you've lost your identity? Is there a way that you can nurture and rekindle some intimacy, or are you just flat out done? And so there are conversations around, should I divorce? What's leading me to even ask this question? Um, and it's for a variety of reasons: childbirth, the loss of a job, in-law issues, childhood issues that were never, dealt with, and now they're showing up in the marriage. And so sometimes I've worked with couples individually and together on their childhood traumas that are showing up in their marriage.
Yeah.
Can we flip to the other side of that coin? Because I met with a group of young women, 19 and 20, who all had children, um, at least one. Some had more than one. And just in getting to know them, one of the questions that I asked was, well, do any of you guys have a good relationship with your children's father? And it might have been 12, 13 of them, and only two raised their hand. Like, so they've never been married. They've never, been married with this person, but there still has to be trauma. And like, I could hear the pain even as they talked and tried to not, show their pain. But like, how do they even start to heal? And so that I don't know if what the generational thing, like, I don't know if their mothers were young mothers and all of those
Mhm.
things. But then how do they then heal and then start generational patterns and practices so that
Mhm.
this doesn't go on to
Yeah.
their children?
Yeah.
And so that they can heal their relationships, not necessarily get back together, but heal their relationships with these fathers so that these kids have an opportunity to have a
Mhm.
healthy life and to see a healthy relationship.
Yeah. I mean, you spoke about a number of issues, one being the risk factors that may have come into play from how they were raised, how their mothers may have had them at an early age. Then you factor in their relationship that they may or may not have had with their father. Hold on, my battery. I'm sorry. I thought I had plugged this in. We don't want to die here. Okay, here we go. um, some people say daddy issues that they may have had, but allowing for that conversation to happen. And as a parent, as a mother, you're going to put your child first, and which sometimes is, oh, well, I'll heal later, or I can't focus on me as much. But what I would love to see, and I've seen it happen in some recent workshops, is for the mothers to bring their children and work on it together, because there is a
Mhm.
connection that happens, a bonding that needs to happen as the mother is healing, to heal with their child. Their child will experience a different part of them when they see their parent working through something. Even having a simple dialogue to say, mommy isn't equipped with this. This is something I've never experienced before, but we're going to figure it out together. Creating that sense of vulnerability and open emotional intelligence with your child. I think if we normalize that conversation, then as mothers, we won't feel so guilted with doing the things that's necessary to take care of ourselves, while also nurturing our children and healing those generational curses.
So much work to
I
do.
know Crystal keeps just shaking her head like,
So much,
And
right? Like,
it is so much. It's so
yeah.
much. And it sometimes just amazes me how we can even walk around and function.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it is so much that we have to heal from.
And so much that goes unnoticed, right? Like
Yeah.
just literally, and I'm about to share something that Crystal like came as a revelation for me in this conversation. So of course I haven't talked to Crystal about it, but when you talked about the reshaping of relationships in a divorce, right? And who do you get in the divorce, friendship wise,
Mhm.
or what shifts, right? And so, Lakeisha, Chris and I have known each other for over 30 years, and I got divorced before she did. And I made a decision without having a full conversation with her to pull away from her, who was still in her marriage, right? This is my best friend. We were friends before either one of us got married. And I made a decision without having a conversation, right? And
Mhm.
so we separated from one another for quite a few years. The relationship looked very, very different because right, like was trying to navigate the relationship changes that were happening, plus making a decision for my friend for what she needed inside of her marriage, right?
Yeah.
Like without even talking to her about that. And
And
so,
we still got divorced. So go ahead.
You thought it was gonna be contagious.
right, right. And so, right, like holding on to those things, like
Mhm.
that was in me. And so, in some way, micro or macro, in ways, it's impacted relationships that I was
Mhm.
not even aware of. And that's the necessity of being in a therapist's office, being in somebody who's licensed to help you unpack, right? Like, because I was bleeding on people who didn't cut me because I didn't have
Yeah.
access to my friend. And I made that decision, right? Like, what difference might it have been had I named that thing or even had language to name it that many
Right.
years
Yeah.
ago? So I really appreciate the ways that you're lifting up. And I hope that our listeners are getting those same kind of gems that they're, oh, another aha moment that'll make them slow down and start to journal. Or if you don't like to journal, your thoughts come too fast. Somebody recently said, pick up your phone and turn on the memo
Yes.
and start talking, right? Like whatever that avenue is, I really appreciate. And again, I hope our listeners are picking up some of these gems. And it's hard,
Mhm.
right? Like this is not easy work, but what happens on the other side is got to be a different kind of freedom, a lighter air, the ability to be soft and be vulnerable and not have to own
Mhm.
and carry it. So I really, really appreciate what you have brought to us thus far in this conversation. And
Mhm.
so, again, always the fastest hour of the day. I want to talk specifically about the work that you do so that our listeners who are curious may have questions and can reach out to you. Please talk to us about your trauma and divorce recovery work.
Thank you. Yes. And I know we've talked a lot about trauma, 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 recovery, 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 and it can sound so heavy and it is a lot of work. But the goal is to help you not thrive in chaos because you're used to that. Trauma allows you to thrive in chaos. The goal is to get you to experience joy, those little moments that would be fleeting, that you wouldn't stop and go, oh my goodness, look at that beautiful butterfly, and get so much joy out of it because you're so stuck in survival mode. And
Right.
so when we work together, it's all about giving you more tools and resources, not ones that are just cookie cutter for everybody, but taking the things that you already like to do, all the things that you are already strong at doing, looking at how you've already been resilient, the things that you've already overcome, the relationships that you have that are your support network and how they can help you so that you can begin to thrive. And so, in as much as it is to unwrap and unpack patterns and start to do things differently, it's ultimately to introduce you to the best version of yourself. And that is my goal and what I'm dedicated to is because what I didn't go into earlier is because this started with me as a journey of being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in the midst of my first marriage falling apart. And that's when I realized that I was in a relationship that was slowly killing me because
Mm.
I was emotionally
Mm.
traumatized and it was impacting my body. And so if I can get women, especially Black women, because the numbers for Black women being diagnosed with MS are constantly on the rise. If I can get Black women to honor their emotions, to verbalize what they really and truly feel and use their voice, um, I have tingling in my head when I speak so passionately about things, but that was a feeling that normally would have frightened me because I wasn't used to experiencing joy. And
Wow.
so if I can get Black women to be these amazing, beautiful goddesses, if you will, that we were created to be and to own it, then I will feel fulfilled in life.
Wow. Right?
Yeah.
Like the reminder that there is a physical cost,
Yes.
a
Hmm.
physical cost to trauma. There's a physical cost to not being able to have a space to be able to do the work to allow you to be that amazing person, as Crystal has coined for us, that was established at birth.
Hmm.
Wow.
So one thing about Michelle and I is we both have really good friendships with our ex-husbands, which apparently is not a common thing. so
It's not.
so how does okay, first of all, is that even necessary? Like is it even necessary? Is it something that someone getting a divorce after a period of time should even strive for? Or is it like deuces, I'm out, I never ever have to see you again, and I'm
Mhm.
fine with that?
Yeah. Well, I try to stay away from the shoulds because
Right.
everyone's circumstances and
Absolutely.
situation is differently.
Yep.
Sometimes it's
Fair
not
enough.
safe. Sometimes it's just
Right.
flat out not safe to be friends with, someone that you are divorcing. But there are instances where once you break away from someone, you can have compassion and empathy and look at them as the person that they are and not as the former spouse that caused you harm. And in those relationships, I say go for it because it's a measure of forgiveness, which is ultimately healing your body. Forgiveness is a gift that you give to yourself. And so if you can manage to have a healthy relationship, especially if there are children involved, that's beautiful. And no one can dictate for you what is normal and what isn't normal. Even that comes into divorce recovery. When you begin to co-parent, your view or your idea of family will look different from how
Mhm.
you expected it to be, from how your relatives, your friends, their family, their nucleus may look like. And it's up to you to decide what is normal.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful. I I truly appreciate you. Um, I the way that you speak and what you have shared, right? Like I like to think of it as the tennis shoe process, right? Like we're gonna put it in something that's comfortable, relatable, that right, and we can go get it. And sometimes, like the way that you speak, like I feel your experience coming through
Mhm.
your ability to help somebody else, right? Versus someone who got the academic knowledge and stays in the high heel approach, right? Like
Mhm.
where it feels a little less comfortable, feels a little less attainable, right? Because and not knocking, right? Like we're all in
Yeah.
this room with degrees, not knocking that piece of it, but there's something about lived experience
Yes.
coming through on the other end that really makes it feels like tennis shoes. Like I want to come lay on your couch. I'm not even kidding, right?
Well,
Like
I told Crystal this chair I sit in, it reclines, and so I always get a good nap in it. And I'm all about comfy, cozy things. Yeah.
yeah, that it just really. So how can people find you? Like I said, you're so
Mhm.
relatable.
Hmm.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, how can people find you?
Well, first, I thank you
Wait, let
for
me get
that.
my pen first. Oh.
Okay. And it has been a journey to get to a place of feeling authentic enough to share my experiences. But I realized that I want to be for someone else what I needed.
Mm,
And that is, coming through my lived experiences and realizing that everything happens. Um, not because God caused it, but it can be in divine order if I allow Him to use me. And so that is my goal and my purpose. You can reach me on any social media platform at Coach Q Simone. So that's the word Q, Coach, COACH, the letter Q, Simone, SIMONE, or my website, which is kind of long. It's on Q Coaching and Consulting.com. Again, just ON, the letter Q, Coaching and Consulting.com. But I'm also always doing speaking engagements. So if you catch me on any of those social platforms, you'll see when I'm also next doing speaking engagements and workshops.
Thank you so very much. A powerful conversation.
Mhm.
My
You
pleasure.
certainly have been a gift to me, and I can only hope the same for our listeners. I really appreciate the ways in which you share your information and make us think about, one more time, tell us, how do we define trauma? How should we be thinking about trauma as a definition?
Yes. Traumatic experiences are a sudden change to the meaning, safety, and predictability of your world. And I will frame for you when I had my aha moment for what came to mind when I heard that definition for the first time. When I was 7 years old, my family abruptly moved from the east side of Detroit to Oak Park, which may have sounded like, oh, you just moved. But I literally walked home from school one day and saw all my boxes on the lawn, and my mom was loading up the truck, and I barely had to, the opportunity to wave goodbye to my neighborhood friend. That was traumatic for a 7 year old. And then what came following that as the reason why we moved was even more traumatic. And so when I heard that experience, it gave me the permission to own that sudden change was traumatic for me, and it has shaped my perspective of relationships and stability throughout my life. And so that's what happens when we give ourselves definitions and information so that we can validate our experiences and start to heal.
Thank you. Fastest hour of your day.
Every single time. Thank you so much,
It's
LaQuita,
been my
for
pleasure.
coming on here, being as transparent, but bringing knowledge. And I think we all now have the actual definition of trauma bonding because people are out
Right?
here, yeah, thinking something
Yeah.
totally different. Because when you said it, I would not have said what you said. So thank you for sharing that. I think people um, can start on a road to healing
Yeah.
after this, right? And just a reminder to everybody that's listening, give yourself some grace.
Yes.
Give yourself some grace. So thank you so much for sharing, bringing the knowledge and sharing and being transparent about your own story, and uplifting that again, so that healing is possible, but we have to start, and everything starts with us. So again, thank you so much. Thank you, Michele. As always, dynamic conversation. I am Crystal Gunn. I am a Black woman, and I own my amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Krista, for lifting up, right? There's power in healing. Healing is possible. And LaQuita, for reminding us, right? Like the goal is joy,
Hmm.
being able to experience the butterfly and find joy in that. I too am grateful for your transparency and your vulnerability in sharing. This has been a powerful conversation. There is work for us all to do, and there is healing and recovery on the other side. Whatever that needs to look like for you, don't deny yourself in the generations to come access to what that new you could look like. Really excited about, and we'll listen to this one multiple times because you dropped so many gems, and I'm grateful for you. Crystal, as always, I remain grateful to you for the gift that you bring, the obedience to the call that God put on your life to do this work, to create platforms where we can have these conversations, where we are solely driven to uplift and empower women to own their amazing as it was established by birth. The icing on the cake is that I truly get to call you my best friend. It is an honor and a pleasure every week to sit in this seat with you. My name is Michele Harper. I am a Black woman, and without apology, I own my amazing.
I love it. And to both you, Crystal and Michele, I am beyond grateful to have this opportunity to be welcomed into this safe space, to uplift Black women, to be a sense of community and support for all of us. We've all experienced some measure of trauma, and to give ourselves that permission to heal and to feel joy so that we can be free, liberated, and walk in our authentic selves is absolutely amazing to me. And so I am LaQuita Fergerson. I'm a Black woman and I own my amazing.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please find Amazing Women Speak on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Spotify. So whatever your favorite, whatever your favorite platform, like, share, subscribe, and turn notifications on. Take a look at past episodes. Look at the topics and find the ones that speak to your soul. Watch them as many times as you need to and share them with others that you know. Be a blessing. As these
Watch this one. It's the one you didn't know
Yes.
you needed.
Yes.
I promise you, watch this one. Yeah. Uh, yeah, watch this one for sure. Like you said, Michele, several times. And again, thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you to everybody,
Thank
those that
you.
continue to join us every week. We love and appreciate you. We do not take that for granted. We will see you next week with another inspiring episode. Have a great night. See you next week.
God bless you all.